Two men commit the same crime in the same state. One is white, one is black. The white man gets probation. The black man gets 15 years. This isn't a hypothetical. Studies have confirmed it happens every single day in America's courts, but the sentencing is just the beginning. Once that black man walks through the prison gates, he enters a system that was designed from its very foundation with people who look like him in mind. This is what his life looks like from that moment forward. I came back to cover this topic after my last video. I spent a long time going through the data on this one, and I want to be upfront. Some of what I found genuinely shocked me. Let's get into it. Before we step inside the prison, you need to understand the numbers, because the disparity does not start behind bars. It starts long before that. Black Americans make up roughly 13% of the United States population, but they represent 38% of everyone sitting in a jail or prison cell right now. The national incarceration rate of black people is approximately 5 to 6 times the rate of white people, and that ratio holds in every single state in the country. Not most states, every state. According to the NAACP, 1 out of every 3 black boys born in America today can expect to be sentenced to prison at some point in his life. For white boys, that number is 1 in 17, and it is not just one part of the system. The disparity compounds at every stage. Black people are more likely to be stopped, searched, and arrested, even for offenses that occur at similar rates across races. Drug use and drug sales, for example, happen at comparable rates between black and white Americans. But black people are arrested for drug offenses at significantly higher rates. Once arrested, black defendants face higher bail amounts on average. Many cannot afford to pay, so they sit in jail for weeks or months before trial, even though they have not been convicted of anything. At sentencing, federal data shows that black Americans receive prison terms roughly 20% longer than white Americans for similar offenses. And when it comes to getting out, research shows that black inmates are less likely to be granted parole than white inmates with comparable records. Every stage of the pipeline pushes in the same direction, and the roots of this go deeper than most people realize. When the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in 1865, it included one exception, except as a punishment for crime. Immediately after, Southern states passed what were called black codes, laws that criminalized things like being unemployed, being outside after dark, or vagrancy. Black people were arrested in massive numbers for these manufactured offenses, then leased to private businesses, plantations, railroads, and coal mines under a system called convict leasing. States made money. Businesses made money. The prisoners made nothing. Historians have called this period worse than slavery, and it is the foundation that the modern system was built on. So, what actually happens when you enter the system? You arrive at the facility. Your personal belongings are taken. You are strip-searched. You are photographed. You are given a number. From this point forward, that number is how the system identifies you. You go through a process called classification, which determines your security level, your housing assignment, and essentially your daily life for the duration of your sentence. Research has shown that black inmates are more likely to receive higher custody classifications than white inmates with similar criminal histories. Higher classification means more restrictions, less freedom of movement, and fewer privileges. It shapes where you sleep, where you eat, and what kind of work you are assigned. The cell is roughly 6 feet by 9 feet. There is a metal bunk, a toilet with no lid, and a small metal desk attached to the wall. If you are in a facility that is overcrowded, and most are operating at anywhere from 100 to 200% overcapacity, you may be sharing this space with 1 or 2 other people. The demographics inside are immediately obvious. In many state prisons across the country, 60 to 70% of the inmates are Black or Latino, but the overwhelming majority of correctional officers are white. At some facilities, this gap is extreme. At New York's Attica Correctional Facility, the inmate population is predominantly Black. The staff is almost entirely white. This dynamic, who holds power, who does not, and what they look like, shapes everything that follows. One of the first things you learn is the unwritten code of racial self-segregation. In many prisons, inmates eat, exercise, and socialize within their racial group. This is not official policy. No warden posts a sign. But it is a survival code enforced by the inmates themselves and understood by the guards. The yard, the cafeteria, the television room, even the showers. These spaces are divided along racial lines. There are tables in the cafeteria where you sit and tables where you do not. There are areas of the yard that belong to one group and areas that belong to another. Crossing those lines can be dangerous. You learn this on your first day, not because someone explains it to you, but because someone stops you from sitting in the wrong place. The guards shape the experience in other ways too. Research from the Prison Policy Initiative has documented stark racial differences between incarcerated people and staff. In many facilities, the power structure inside the prison mirrors the racial dynamics outside it. A predominantly white staff managing a predominantly Black and Latino population. Black inmates have reported receiving harsher treatment for minor infractions, being spoken to differently, and being subjected to more frequent cell searches than white inmates in the same units. And then there is the daily grind, the part that does not make headlines, but defines every waking hour. At 5 in the morning, a count is called. You stand at your cell door or at your bunk while officers move through the unit, verifying that every inmate is accounted for. This happens multiple times throughout the day. At 6 in the morning, you eat breakfast. Depending on the facility, this happens in a large cafeteria with hundreds of other inmates or inside your cell. Either way, you have roughly 15 to 20 minutes. At 7 in the morning, work call begins. Nearly every able-bodied inmate in the federal and state system is required to work. This is where the story takes a turn that I personally think more people need to know about. Angola Prison in Louisiana is the largest maximum security prison in the United States. It sits on 18,000 acres of land, larger than the island of Manhattan. The land is a former slave plantation. The prison is named after the African country where most of the plantation's enslaved people were taken from. Today, 75% of Angola's inmates are Black. 70% are serving life sentences. Every new inmate who enters Angola, regardless of their crime or their physical condition, starts on what is called the farm line. This means picking crops by hand in the fields: cotton, corn, soybeans, okra, and watermelons. They do this under the watch of armed correctional officers who patrol the rows on horseback. The pay is 2 cents an hour. Some positions pay nothing at all. If you refuse to work, or if you do not work fast enough, you can be placed in solitary confinement. When NBC's Lester Holt visited Angola, he said something on camera that I think captures the reality better than any statistic could. He said he could not escape the optics. Mostly black men working on a former slave plantation under the watch of armed guards on horseback. In 2024, a group of inmates filed a class action lawsuit challenging the farm line, calling it akin to 19th century slavery. Court filings from that case include accounts from inmates describing guards using racial slurs in the fields, including degrading language and threats of physical violence. One inmate, Willie Ingram, who spent 51 years at Angola, described watching men collapse from heat and dehydration while working with little or no water. When inmates protested by throwing their tools in the air, guards in riot gear responded with force. I want to be honest, this is the part that got to me when I was researching this video. I have covered harsh prison conditions on this channel before, but there is something about armed guards on horseback watching black men pick cotton on a former slave plantation in 2025 that is hard to process. And this is not a documentary about history. This is happening right now. But the farm line is not just an Angola problem. Across the country, incarcerated workers earn an average of 13 to 52 cents per hour. At the same time, they are expected to buy basic necessities from the prison commissary: soap, toothpaste, deodorant, snacks, and phone minutes at prices that are often marked up well beyond what you would pay on the outside. A 15-minute phone call home can cost several dollars. The financial burden of supporting someone in prison falls overwhelmingly on family members, and those family members are disproportionately black women. There is another part of prison life that hits black inmates harder than anyone else, and that is solitary confinement. A study of 45,000 inmates at New York's Rikers Island found that black inmates were significantly more likely to be placed in solitary than white inmates. They also received longer stretches in isolation for comparable infractions. Guards have broad discretion when it comes to issuing disciplinary tickets. You can be sent to solitary for something as minor as not returning a food tray, talking back to an officer, or refusing an order. Former inmates at multiple facilities have described guards openly using racial slurs before sending them to the box. If you end up in solitary, here is what it looks like. The cell is roughly the size of a parking space. There may be no window at all, or a slit so narrow it barely qualifies. The lights may stay on 24 hours a day. You eat through a slot in the door. You shower in a cage. If you get outdoor time, it is in another cage, a concrete enclosure with high walls and no view of the sky or the ground beyond the walls. You are alone for 22 to 24 hours a day. There is no one to talk to. The only voices you hear are guards giving orders and the sounds of other inmates you cannot see. This can last months. It can last years. In some cases, it has lasted decades. People who have been through it describe losing their sense of time, talking to themselves for hours, pacing the same 4 steps back and forth until the floor is worn smooth. Some describe the feeling of their personality dissolving, of not being sure anymore who they are or whether what they are experiencing is real. Nearly 50,000 people are held in some form of solitary confinement in the United States at any given time. In some cities, the majority of those people are people of color. The United Nations classifies prolonged solitary confinement as a form of torture. A man named Five Mualim Ak spent 5 years in solitary confinement in the New York State prison system. That is approximately 43,000 hours. During that time, he was not given medication for his diagnosed mental health conditions. He later described the psychological deterioration he experienced, hearing voices, and losing his grip on reality. After his release, he became an advocate for ending solitary confinement and told reporters that racism in jail is, in his words, a blunt thing. He said guards would tell inmates to their faces that they did not like black people before sending them to the box. The deeper you go into the system, the wider the racial gap gets. Black Americans make up 14% of the country's population, but 33% of the total prison population. Among people who have already served 10 years or more, Black Americans represent 46%. And among people serving life without the possibility of parole, the most extreme sentence in the American system, Black Americans represent 55%. The disparity does not just exist, it gets worse the longer the sentence. One of the clearest examples of how policy created this disparity is the crack cocaine sentencing gap. In 1986, Congress passed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which created a 100-to-1 sentencing disparity between crack cocaine and powder cocaine. These are two forms of the same drug, but crack was more prevalent in black communities, while powder cocaine was more common in white communities. Before this law was passed, the average sentencing gap between black and white federal drug defendants was 11%. 4 years after the law went into effect, that gap had exploded to 49%. The Fair Sentencing Act of 2010 reduced the ratio from 100-to-1 to 18-to-1, and the First Step Act of 2018 applied those changes retroactively. But by then, an entire generation of black men had already received decades-long sentences for offenses that would have carried far less time if the drug had been in powder form. Back at Angola, the math is even more stark. Angola has the largest population of inmates serving life sentences in the entire country. 74% of the prison's population is serving life. Only about 4 inmates per year are granted parole. Around 32 inmates die at Angola every year. Most of the men inside will never leave. Now let's talk about what happens if you do get out. You walk through the gates with whatever you had when you arrived, sometimes decades earlier. The clothes might not fit anymore. The address on your file might not exist. Some states give you a small amount of gate money. In certain states, that can be as little as $25 to $50. You may have no valid ID, no phone, no address, no one waiting, and you now carry a criminal record that follows you everywhere you go for the rest of your life. The world outside has changed. If you went in before smartphones existed, everything looks different. If you went in before social media, the way people communicate has shifted entirely. You have to relearn how to function in a society that moved forward without you, while also carrying the weight of where you've been. In many states, a felony conviction means you lose the right to vote, even after you've served your full sentence. Formerly incarcerated people face legal barriers in housing, employment, and education. Landlords can reject you. Employers can reject you. In many cases, they do. Research shows that formerly incarcerated black men face compounded discrimination. A criminal record is a barrier. Being black is a barrier. The combination of the two creates obstacles that are measurably greater than either factor alone. Lifetime earnings drop dramatically. Stable housing becomes difficult to find. And the communities you return to, the ones most affected by mass incarceration, are disproportionately black. High levels of incarceration in a community are linked to higher crime rates and neighborhood deterioration, which in turn leads to more arrests and more incarceration. Researchers call this the vicious cycle. Communities lose fathers, sons, workers, and voters, which weakens the community, which makes incarceration more likely for the next generation. Within 3 years of release, roughly 50 to 60% of formerly incarcerated people in the United States are rearrested. I started this video with Malcolm Alexander, a man who spent 38 years at Angola for a crime he did not commit. He was convicted based on a single eyewitness identification that was later proven unreliable. He was exonerated in 2018 by the Innocence Project. When he walked out, he was 60 years old. He had entered at 22. He had spent the majority of his adult life picking crops in the fields of a former slave plantation for a crime he did not commit. When asked about his experience, he said the 13th Amendment did not end slavery for people like him. I have covered prisons from around the world on this channel, supermax facilities in Colorado, labor camps in North Korea, mega prisons in El Salvador. But there is something about this story that is different, because this is not happening in a dictatorship or a war zone. This is happening in the wealthiest country on earth, the country with the most people behind bars, and the country that wrote the word liberty into its founding documents. 1 out of every 3 black boys born in America today can expect to see the inside of a prison. Whether you think that number is a reflection of individual choices or a reflection of the system itself depends on where you stand. But the numbers are the numbers, and the history is the history, and the men in those fields are still there. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. And if you have not seen my video on how prisoners are treated around the world, check it out next. I think it will give you a completely different perspective on everything we just talked about.